baby boomers.
I used to be with it.
Millennials.
Okay, boomer.
Generation X.
What's going on?
And Gen Z. What do they have in common? Not a lot, it turns out. But one thing they can agree on is that this is the political podcast they want to listen to. Welcome to Not My Generation, the political podcast that looks at political events, news, and happenings across the world and at home through a generational lens. Your hosts are Dr. Emily Stacey and Professor James Davenport, two political scientists from Rose State College. But the views expressed on this program are solely the views of the host and their guests and do not reflect the views of Rose State College, its administration, faculty, or students. Coming up on today's program, it's been insanity, it's been chaos, it's been the inmates running the asylum, all of that, right? We're going to take this gun and point it at our foot and pull the trigger.
We're also foaming at the mouth.
And now, here are James and Emily. Hey, Emily, how are you doing?
I'm great. It's Friday. It's fall. It's starting to feel like, football season, actually, right? Sweater weather. It's very exciting.
We both have our sweaters on.
Yes. Rose State, we're still repping, right? You can't see us, but we're still repping.
You gotta show us support. But we got a lot to talk about this week, right?
It has been a week.
It has been a lot. I'm kind of sore this week. I got back into the gym, and I'm a little older than I used to be, if you don't know. And the muscles take a little bit more time to recuperate from that activity. So I'm a little sore, but man, I'm also a little battered mentally from all the stuff that's been going on.
It has been, I don't even know where to start, but I think we know where to start, but we don't know where it's going to end.
It's been insanity. Yes. It's been chaos. It's been the inmates running the asylum, all of that, right?
But all from the same party. Let's get into it.
But large part now, we're going to get into this.
Stop teasing the people.
I'm not going to give the Democrats a pass entirely. But yes, by and large, this was all coming out of one side of the house, right?
Okay. I'll be interested to see how you frame that Democrat argument.
If you don't know, if you've been under a rock for the last week or two, right, you might not realize there's been just complete chaos in the U.S. House of Representatives. So Matt Gaetz, representative from Florida, filed a motion to vacate the office of Speaker of the House.
And why was that, Professor Davenport? Because I do believe that we pontificated on this on the last podcast.
So Gaetz was upset that Speaker McCarthy, former Speaker McCarthy now, negotiated with Democrats to not shut down the government, right? And got something through the House based on having some Democrat votes.
I just need to stop you right here because I have been basking in the glory of my rightness right in all of my American Confederal government classes, right? For the last 2 weeks, I've been telling these kids through the shutdown argument that there was no way that we keep the government open and McCarthy keeps his job. There was just not going to he had to crawl to the Democrats to pass that continuing resolution.
And you know what? I am not a fan of Kevin McCarthy. I don't feel sorry for him.
No, not if you know the history.
But he did the right thing in that scenario, right? Absolutely. He said, we're not going to shut down the government based on the complaints of a few, quite frankly, cranky representatives, in the House. And if I've got to go pull some Democrats to make it happen, I'm going to do that, right? And it cost him his job, and he had to know that was going to happen, right?
Absolutely. Well, okay, so you said it started this week, but I think we got to go all the way back to January, right? Whenever it took, 16 votes for him to actually take that leadership position, but it was with the caveat that it would only take one motion to vacate to start that process. So Kevin McCarthy kind of always knew that he was probably pretty tentative. This was just kind of the nail in the coffin.
This was a way to hold him hostage, right? Exactly. And he had worked. Now, his problem was, from what I understand, nobody really trusted him, right? No. The White House didn't trust him. The Democrats didn't trust him. Right. And a good deal of his caucus didn't.
He had reneged on a couple of different
right.
things with the Democratic Party, and then didn't really come to them. And then, of course, during the shutdown, didn't come to them until it was the last minute. Sure. But of course, in an attempt to appease the Gateses and the Boeberts and the Taylor Greens, he also launched that impeachment inquiry into Biden. And so that was cutting everything off with the Democratic Party in the House at that point.
Yeah. And so they file this, they have a vote, and 8 Republicans. So just so you know, Republicans have a razor-thin majority. 4 votes, I think, is what they can spare, right? Yep. So 8 Republicans and all of the Democrats voted to vacate the chair, right? Now, this is historic. We've never had a Speaker of the House removed like this. Right. So it is historic in that sense. And nobody knows who's going to step in and fill that role, right? Who's going to be able to satisfy all these different
That's
parties?
Exactly the problem that they have now. They've got about 6 or 7 names that have been floated out there now.
Let me guess. Hold on.
Uh-oh.
Is Donald Trump one of those names?
Yes, but his old buddy Sean Spicer yesterday pretty clearly, I think, assuaged a lot of people's minds about that. Sean Spicer reiterated the fact that man, Donald Trump, does not want to be Speaker of the House and does not want any part of that nonsense.
Would at this
exactly.
Point? Who would?
Right? I am not sure, but that man is running for president. He is not interested.
Running for president, and the only calculation that would be going through his mind is, does this help me or hurt me in running for president?
And it absolutely demolish. I mean, I think personally, the infighting without him hurts the Republican Party wholly in the election. But again, back to your statement that we started this thread on. I don't know who comes next. Yeah. There's not obviously someone who is so far to the right, like a Jim Jordan is the one right now who Trump's endorsed apparently as of this morning, right? That's going to be probably the end of him being viable for those moderate Republicans. Then you have folks, you've got actually 2 Oklahomans, right? Let's bring it back home, rumored on this list. Tom Cole, who would be my obvious choice.
Actually, Cole would not be.
Oh, I think he would be great.
Bad choice,
I think that he would be a great establishmentarian, moderate, sane, Mitt Romney-esque conservative.
And he's got conservative. It's not like he's
been there forever.
He'll support tax cuts. Yes. All of this stuff. So it's not like he's a raving moderate who abandons the party on.
He's just not going to do this wackadoodle stuff that wing of the party wants him to do.
Yeah, and which is why he won't get their support, right?
I just don't think that Jim Jordan or a Scalise, I think they are too far to the right for the Tom Coles.
I think you're right. Here's the question I have, and this is where I'm going to go and say, I'm going to ding the Democrats in the House just a little bit on this, all right? They didn't start this process.
No, they did not.
They have no obligation to do anything, but when the vote came, they voted to support the chaos, not prevent it from that right?
I would like to see this reversed and Nancy Pelosi to have been kept and retained in that seat.
Well, that wasn't the option.
That wasn't the option. I'm just saying.
So when Democrats had the opportunity to be the adults in the room and say, we're not going to let these 8 Republicans throw the House in chaos, we will hold our nose and keep McCarthy there so we can keep moving forward. They said, nope, not going to do it. Now, I understand why, right? They didn't trust him. He apparently has moved off. So, and they're under no obligation to help him. Right. And like I said, I don't feel sorry for Kevin McCarthy. He made his own bed. He's going to have to lie in it. But if you're upset about the chaos, you cannot exempt the Democrats from some culpability in creating it, right? I know, and I agree. They didn't start this road. They had no obligation to bail Kevin McCarthy out, but they could have went to somebody on their, hey, look, if you put up Tom Cole, we will vote for Tom Cole right now. And I think you could have had a majority of Democrats and enough Republicans to make that happen. And at least you know who the speaker is coming up front.
There was no kind of organization in that. That's kind of a crack dream there.
There's no thought process going, certainly not on those 8 Republicans. There's other than we can burn the House down and we're going to do it because we're not getting our way.
Yeah. Right. I'm going to, of course, push back on your Democratic.
I'm fine with that.
The Democratic Party.
Listen, I just think that's a sliver of it. I'm not
laying
this at their feet and saying, this is their problem.
Sure.
It's just
no, absolutely not. And it's an election year. It's a campaign season, and yes, we expect and we would love to think that there are adults in the room and all of that fun stuff, but they are watching the Republican Party eat itself, and I mean,
and what are these people thinking? I mean, if you're a Republican and you're looking at Biden's polling numbers, which are abysmal, Democrats aren't happy with him. Republicans and moderates aren't happy with him. And instead of being on the same page of we've got a real chance of winning back the presidency, making some gains in the House, maybe even making some gains, instead of doing that, they're shooting themselves in the foot. Yeah. Right? They're like, we're going to take this gun and point it at our foot and pull the trigger.
Yeah. And I think that, the Gates of the world believe that it's going to be useful, that it's going to help. And, the rhetoric and to kind of stir the pot and lead directly to Trump, right? All roads lead to Trump in 2024. But it's really, the American people want to see governance.
Now, now I'm really going to, you might really get a little aggravated at me for this, right? Is Gates a millennial?
No, I don't think so.
No,
I don't know.
How old is he?
I'm gonna.
Well, let's look that up. Okay, I'm just wondering because I was listening to some folks discussing this, and they were talking about how you have a new breed of congressperson who are not all that concerned about legislating. They're concerned about social media hits and concerned about ramping up their fundraising ability through stuff they do through social media. And so you have some new legislators who, rather than hiring legislative aides to actually get legislation passed, they're hiring social media experts to move them. And I'm just wondering, that seems a little sketchy to me. And I'm wondering if that's a generational thing. So what'd you find out?
Yes, he is on the cusp. Yes, 1982. Right. So we have to take credit for him. But that's all right because,
And he clearly, listen, his voters voted for him, right? He's not going to do anything that he thinks is going to put himself at risk with those folks. Right. So he clearly thinks they're on board with this kind of action.
Exactly.
Right.
He and Ramaswamy are, that's the new breed of young Republican that grew up whenever I was in university. Right.
And listen, I'm not the kind who thinks I want Congress passing a whole bunch of laws, but there are important ones that we kind of need to get done, right? And that might be a good one to start with, right?
Like the ag bill that's about to expire
and that's right.
Impact Oklahoma really poorly.
And another thing, and we'll probably get into this a little bit later, but another thing that was aggravating for these Republicans was the funding for Ukraine, which the Republicans used to be the party of anti-Russia, right? You can't trust them. And all of a sudden it's like, well, it doesn't matter. It's almost like you have a updated version of, who was the prime minister during World War II that was like peace in our time. His name's right off the top, right before Winston Churchill. Neville Chamberlain. It's like you got a bunch of Neville Chamberlains who are just hyped up social media, pursuers, and they're like, it's not going to matter. Just let them do this, and this doesn't mess with us anyway. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it goes right back to us, lamenting candidate recruitment, and all of the things that we talked about in the podcast last time. People are not paying attention. They are choosing the loudest, most bombastic person in the room. Said, "Oh yeah, that's my guy. That he's going to get some stuff done, or at least he's going to yell the loudest." That's right. And that's not a way to govern. It's not.
They'll fight, yeah, but sometimes you got to be able to compromise. You got to be able to collaborate with other people to get stuff done,
including Democrats. One of the first bills that Obama co-authored in Senate whenever he became a senator was with Coburn.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so, and when your majority is that thin, to think that you have some right, and I get it, the House is a majoritarian institution. If you can get 218 votes, you can do anything you want. But when your majority is that thin, you need to be thinking, what can we get done? Yeah. And let's not just try to cram everything down the other side's throat. We can make campaign cases in campaign years why we should have more of our party. but let's figure out what we can get done, where we can be a little bit more unified, and then put those other issues off to the side for campaign season, right? But nobody's thinking that way. No. It's constant campaign.
It is. We should have pulled how much legislation has actually been passed since January. I didn't think about that, but not a whole lot. Yeah. We should pull those numbers eventually.
That would be interesting to look at, right? So we know even in a normal time, very little legislation gets passed, right?
Usually about 4% of the bills that are filed.
And I would bet it's less than that.
Oh, yeah, I guarantee.
For sure. Yeah. Well, the chaos didn't just end at the national level.
It didn't.
We had some funky things going on here at the state level too, right? So Governor Stitt calls a special session. Now, when he called the special session, if I remember right, he said, I want to eliminate the income tax, right? The state income tax. Yep. I want to put us on a path to getting to zero income tax. And I want these accountability measures to make more transparency in the budgeting process, right? Yep. And then on Tuesday, when so in between that time, President Pro Tem Greg Treat says, well, do we have a plan? What's the plan to do this? And there's no plan. The governor basically said, I told you what I want you to do. You figure out the plan.
How to do it. Right? Exactly.
Is that okay?
He has a bunch of charts and, these big poster boards and, there are lines and numbers on them. And he says, go do it.
Go. And so Treat says, well, Governor Stitt, why don't you come? We're going to hold a Senate Budget and Appropriations Committee hearing. Why don't you come and present your information and your plan to that committee? And then we can talk about how we can make that work if we can, right? And Stitt hems and haws, and then finally is like, no, I'm not going to do that, right? And comes out that Tuesday, the day the special session is supposed to start, holds a press conference and basically says, well, really what I want is a 0.25% cut in the income tax, right? Then why didn't you just say that to begin with?
Exactly.
Right. That would have been, I don't think Treat would have been all this concerned if that's where the governor had started. But instead, the governor starts with, we're going to eliminate it, not going to replace it with anything, and just make it happen. And Treat's like, I'm not sure that's good for the budget.
Exactly.
Right. Let's talk about this. So you have that. The Senate does hold its Budget and Appropriations Committee hearing.
But guess who does not show up?
This governor does not show up. I don't think anybody from his administration showed up. Now, there were some, if I understand, there were some agency heads that showed up and stuff like that, talking about this. And they conclude their hearing, and Treat's like, well, we don't have a plan. We haven't heard from the governor. We're done. And sine die. Yep. We were adjourning and we're done. Yep. The House, meanwhile, it hadn't even started doing much, right? And McCall was at the press conference with Treat. McCall's on board, it seems like. He's like right there with the governor. And McCall now is left holding the bag. What do you do?
Well, nothing, because the Senate is done. You can't move bills.
You could pass something out of the House, but it's not going to go anywhere.
It's not going to the desk of the governor.
That's right. And so McCall, he did not sine die. He adjourned subject to the call of the speaker, right? So so we'll see what happens, but I don't know where they're going to go from this. And this was so poorly coordinated.
It really was, yeah.
I mean, if you're the governor and you want to have a bold move, and if I'm a governor, I want to have a bold move too, right? If you want to have a bold move, go work with these folks ahead of time.
Exactly.
Because you need them.
Right. This special session this has been rumored throughout the summer, right? This wasn't just something that, spontaneously came up. So Stitt had a long time, or at least an adequate amount of time to do his research, to get the numbers together, to distribute it to his party. Right. What is really interesting, and again, for the folks who are not maybe nearly as mired in Oklahoma politics as we are, you've got a supermajority of Republicans, right? Obviously, your governor's a Republican, and both McCall and Greg Treat are Republicans.
If they want to do something, they're going to get it done, right?
Exactly,
I mean, we saw that with school choice, as controversial as it was. They got that done because they wanted to, right? And so if they wanted to do this, they could have got it done. So I don't know what the conflict here, but I think Treat does not like the governor saying, go do this.
It. Yeah,
right?
no. Greg Treat has been, he has been a long-standing senator. I would have expected that his term limit is up pretty quick. Right. He was there whenever I was at the state capitol. And he's always been like this. He's very gung-ho whenever he was doing a lot of the DHS reform bills. This is just his manner. He gets stuff done, but you've got to communicate with him. You've got to give him the information so that he can make the best decisions. And most of the pro tems have been like that I've seen. So he's not going to just roll over exactly.
Right.
Whenever Stitt
whatever
says,
you say, I'm going to do this. He's like, well, let's put a plan together. Let's see how we can do this in a way that doesn't wreak havoc with the budget, cost agencies funds. That sounds reasonable to me. Right. Now I will say, because I was looking into this, I am not a fan of the income tax, whether it's at the national level or the state level. Let me just throw that out there. Full disclosure, not a fan of it.
He's a libertarian.
But I think there's some complications with eliminating the state income tax without having a plan because
where's that money coming from?
That's a lot of money in the state budget.
Yes.
I think it could be done, but one of the complications that I don't think they can get rid of, their whole school choice program was built upon the existence of an income tax because the way it functions is it's a tax credit, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you don't have an income tax, how are you going to make that work? And it seems to me that he didn't take that into account, nor did he take into account that he has been chirping for a long time, and he actually has Democrat support on this, of eliminating the sales tax on groceries, right?
Do something
that
popular,
seems like an
Stitt.
easy call. And an easy call. And I'm going to tell you, if people are worried about making up revenues, there's an easy way to do that. I say easy way, all right? But we do not apply our sales tax to services. Almost all services in the state are exempt. And in an economy where the bulk of your economy is now in the service sector rather than the manufactured products of goods and such, you want to not be having a shrieking sales tax base. You want that growing one. And so we ought to just extend that sales tax to those services and move on down the road. That would certainly make up the gap coming from a loss in revenue from the sales tax on groceries. Right. And for those that are concerned, there's always been this concern about sales taxes that they tend to be regressive. Mm-hmm. That's especially true for items that households need, right? And so, but I think with services, what you're going to find out is more wealthy households consume services at a greater rate than poorer households. And so if you're concerned about progressivity, that seems to be a little bit more of a progressive way of doing a sales tax than how we do it now. Now, we need to see all the numbers. And I think this is where, again, I'm right there with Treat. I'm not opposed to this idea, but I want to see some numbers. I want to see some hard numbers that we can validate that says, here's how we can do this while meeting the services of our citizens. We've got to make sure that we do that while it doesn't disrupt the function of government. And that is a tax system that is fair and efficient, right? And that's ought to be the aim. Right. And I don't see that. I just didn't see any of that coming from the governor's office. It's just, we want to get rid of it. Okay, that's a goal. That's not a plan. Exactly. Maybe that was one of his aspirational goals, right? Maybe that was really the goal. I don't know, but just can't you coordinate with some folks? Right, exactly. Can't you just come down and say, hey, this is what I'd like to do, and then they can say, okay, well, here's the information that we'd like to have. Okay, let's figure out how we can put that together. And maybe instead of calling a special session, they could have called an interim study, right? And said, let's look at this. So if we come up with something, we have something ready to go in the next session, right? And we don't have to wait and figure this out.
And waste taxpayer dollars.
Right. I mean, how much did that special session cost? Because you got to pay all those legislators, right? The per diem rate that they get. You got to have the staff there, all of that. So it's almost like the legislature is in session for that time. And that's a lot of cost to get nothing.
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Yeah. I sense that there is still not a lot of love lost between Treat and Stitt.
It seems like there is some conflict still residing there, right? And I'm not sure what that is. Now, I guess, of course, I guess McCall and Stitt have kind of made up a little bit, right? Yeah. I mean, there was friction between them, especially on that school choice stuff. This last year, there wasn't just smooth sailing. Yeah. they all got to the same place eventually, but it took a lot of work for that to happen. And I don't know, maybe I think McCall is planning on running for governor the next time around.
I think that Treat is also thinking. I would be surprised if he's not
maybe
thinking
there's
about
some
something.
conflict there. I'm not sure what's going on, but I do think in this instance, Treat was right to say, let's do this in a way that we can justify it. Let's do this in a way that we have accounted for how this is going to happen and what effect it's going to have, rather than just say, oh, the governor wants to do this, so let's go do it. And if the governor just wanted a 0.25% cut in the income tax,
you should have led with that.
Lead with that. And that would have, I don't think he would have got the resistance that he got initially, right?
I agree with you. Yeah.
So I don't know if this is, I really have this feeling that when you come into government without any other experience and you come into government from a CEO background where you're used to just giving orders, and you don't realize these folks over here who you need don't take orders for you, right? They don't serve you.
Yeah.
It's a different environment. Exactly. I get the feeling sometimes he still hasn't learned that.
That I was just about to make that parallel back to Donald Trump, right? Whenever he first came into office, he really had, and I mean, throughout his 4 years, had a very hard time getting that. Right. He had to work with the legislature, and that he needed the legislator a whole lot more than the legislator needed him.
And in any democratic system, the legislature is going to be the player, right? It's going to be the one that determines what happens and what doesn't. Yep. And that's how it should be, quite frankly.
Right. It's the people's house. Yeah.
I don't want a system where the president can act like a king and just say, do this and do that, and everybody just follows it. I don't want that at all. Even if that person was as libertarian as me, I don't want that.
Exactly.
I don't want that. The legislature should be, and the legislature requires us to compromise. Right. It requires us to figure out how do we take the differences between our ideologies, our political leanings, our constituencies. How do we reconcile those to produce the best that we can? Yeah. Right. And so I'm a big fan of the legislature, and I want it holding the power. And I want a legislature that's willing to stand up to an executive, not one that's just going to roll over and be their lapdog.
Absolutely. I don't know that I've ever told you, right? Because I get the sense that you think that I use the word libertarian in a derogatory way. I refer to myself as a liberal-tarian, right? So on most social issues, I am very liberal, but otherwise I want the government to, back off and leave me alone. So we meet at the ends most days. I think people
would be surprised how much agreement that you and I might have on some things or others. I just want people to be left alone for the most part, right?
Especially me, thanks.
And I want I don't want us to always presume that because the government's going to do it, that is some non-human entity, right? Absolutely. People who work in government have the same frailties, same interests, same goals as all of us, same faults. And we should not expect that because the government is doing it, all of a sudden, all of those human frailties that we see in other sectors vanish, right? Now, we talked about state, we talked about the national level, but we've got some interesting stuff going on internationally as well, yes?
Yeah, a couple of summits have just occurred late September. So you had BRICS meeting first. This is an alliance that rivals Western international organizations or Western-led.
For our listeners who might not know what BRICS stands for,
absolutely. I was about to get into it.
Okay, I jumped ahead. Sorry.
No, you're fine. Absolutely. No, because I wanted to plug my book. My latest book really dissects some of the deglobalization that's occurring and this sort of global balance of power that is shifting currently. And of course, you can see this in the existence of BRICS, right? So BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And so they are their own sort of economic, political association, organization, effectively.
Now, these countries, would it be safe to say these countries are perceived to kind of be like second-tier economic folks? Is that correct? And I don't say that insultingly. I mean, just they're not at the level of the United States, China. If you look at GDP or if you look at per capita income, they're like just below. Is that fair to say or is that not fair to say?
Well, I mean, because China is part of BRICS, I would probably argue that
Well, maybe.
Right.
Yeah, of course, you look at China's per capita income, it's not that great, but they do have the second largest GDP.
They do. And they also have a lot of investments around the world with the Belt and Road Initiative. So BRICS, let me not diverge because I can go on forever about these things. So BRICS really is important in terms of this rebalancing, like I said, of the global balance of power, especially right now, because you have Russia obviously really pushing at the liberal democratic order that we've known post World War II, which has relied upon the existence of these international organizations like the United Nations, which also had a summit directly after BRICS. I don't think it was a coincidence that BRICS held their summit right before the United Nations. One of the huge things that came out of BRICS was that they're now BRICS Plus. So they've added another 6 countries, which is massive. So they've added 2 new African countries, 2 new Middle Eastern countries, and Argentina, right? So it's Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, that are now joining. And so I think probably your GDP argument may get a little bit skewed there. The UAE makes a ton of money.
Yeah, well, they got some oil deposits, right?
They do. This is a big deal because whenever they formally join in 2024, this expanded group will now produce over 42% of the global oil supply and 37% of the gas supply, which is ginormous, right? And so if I'm Vladimir Putin, and I am a huge player in BRICS, and I'm Xi Jinping, and I'm a huge player in BRICS, and all I want to do is stick it to the West, this is a massive upgrade for them. And it certainly, personally inviting Iran is certainly no pat on the back.
Right. This should only incentivize the West transition away from oil and gas as energy sources. Right?
I would think so.
Now, I think there's an answer to that is better than our current way we're trying to do this. And I think Germany is learning this kind of the hard way, which is the science. If you're one of these folks, follow the science. All right. The science is pretty clear. The cleanest, most efficient source of energy, and especially when we're talking about producing electricity and things like that, is nuclear energy. And it's also the safest to produce. Yeah. And in the U.S., during the 70s, we got on a train of, well, we're not going to do the nuclear anymore. Germany was about to close down one of its nuclear plants. But you know what country in the West has some of the lowest, if not the lowest, emissions rates? France. You know where France produces most of its energy from? Nuclear energy, right? And so this should make the West think. And listen, I think there are some, again, I hate bashing on my Republican brethren. Sure. I used to be one of them. And I hate bashing on them too much. But there are some Republicans that have some cultish-like fetish for oil and gas. Oh, yeah, right? Absolutely. And no, we can't transition from now, tomorrow, to something else. Right. But if we have a better way of producing energy that's more efficient, less damaging to the environment, whether you're a climate change denier or whatever else, I don't care about that. The fact is, nuclear is better for the environment in almost every way than oil and gas is. Right. All right. And so why would we not transition to something that's better? And that gives us time to develop wind and solar, to make them more efficient, to bring them online without, this kind of massive shift that we have to have all these subsidies and we don't know what works. And then, what is somebody, I think it's Germany, shutting down
Nord Stream 2, yeah.
There a couple of things, and now they're having to rely on a coal plant, right? Yeah. Does that make sense to anybody? So that should make the West say, what can we do to more quickly transition out of reliance on oil and gas? You're never not going to have, there's too many products that are made with oil and gas to say we're never going to use them. Sure. But we should not be opposed, if we find a better way of producing energy, to do that.
I agree. I mean, a lot of American consumption of oil is Canadian anyway, right? So I'm not, I don't know how much in terms of, yes, I do agree with you. I think that this may be a poke in the terms of us getting to a place where we decide that we're going to invest in other sources of energy. I just am not holy soul, that you're going to have that. I mean, that contingency that still fight against it.
You're right. And you're going to have some compromise, and you're going to have to say we're not going to get everything we want, but we can move in a better direction.
With no Speaker of the House.
There we go. So that's going to be
another interesting point with the BRICS conversation goes to the currency, right? And the economic situation, right? So it's not necessarily a model of global governance at this point. And as you mentioned, a lot of these countries are in the global south is the appropriate term in terms of international relations. We don't use second world countries anymore, things like that. So it is interesting. Yes, they are, of course, they're more than poor, right? But that also is something that the G7 needs to kind of realize. These countries, as we just mentioned, they are still important players within the global scene. And so, and they're binding themselves together in this association because they've been eschewed by the West, right? And specifically by the United States in these international organizations like the IMF, for example. And so this BRICS is the answer for them. It is interesting. It notes, I read a foreign affairs article that all BRICS Plus members and the future of the group partner countries, they all have their own agendas, right? So they're not attached to, pushing Putin's line right? And so that is a really
cooperation between them is not necessarily guaranteed, is what they're saying. Is that right?
Right. They're promoting their own vision of the world, but it's working against that capitalist imperialist notion that they believe that global order has rested on for the last 70 or so years. So again, this is an important development. The fact that they've expanded and have added specifically Iran, which is an enemy of the state. It's very, very interesting. Of course,
the BRICS are getting better, bigger,
better and bigger.
And the West ought to take notice.
They should.
And I'm going to say this: the response ought not to be immediately confrontational.
It shouldn't.
Right? We should say, okay, what's going on here, and how do we expand things that have been happening to include these countries rather than marginalizing them,
because a lot of these countries, and again, there's no real threat to the American dollar, but these countries are starting to trade amongst each other in their own national currencies. Right. Again, not going to ever harm, the United States dollar, economically speaking, in terms of global trade, but it is a development that we need to be aware of. Sure. So kind of ponied or dovetailed to that was the UN summit, and I'll just briefly go through this. So September marked the opening of the 78th session of the UN, and so each session lasts a year. So this was September 19th through the 26th. You had 194 speakers, and so that includes, of course, the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, and Pope Francis actually spoke as well. And all 193 countries that are officially recognized by the UN are invited to speak. Absent, right? So that the math doesn't math there, right? So I'm sure I know you are mathing right now. So who was absent from that list? Afghanistan, obviously, since the Taliban's takeover. Myanmar, obviously, military junta, a lot of things going on there. Niger, going through a coup currently. And then the really questionable one, the international community is kind of perplexed by this one. Madagascar didn't show up. It's not anything kind of major going on there. It seems like it was kind of just an administrative failure, like it didn't get put on the schedule.
Oh, we forgot. Do I have a meeting today?
It's really,
Am I supposed
really
to be
funny,
somewhere?
right? There's a really deep gender divide. And of course, this is palpable in politics all across the world, but within the United Nations, it is just blaringly obvious. So of the speakers, just 21 of them were women, 174 men.
And only
21 women spoke.
Okay, so this goes to something that I'm curious about, right? Now, in democratic nations, for women have to get elected, right? So let's take anybody that comes from a non-democratic, but most of those countries are going to be democratic still, right? So is this a fact of not enough women running for office, or is this a fact that the population still aren't electing them when they have the option to? Is it a combination of both? What do you think's going on there?
I think in a lot of these countries, it's that there are not enough women being recruited or feel like they are knowledgeable enough or worthy. I mean, in some of these countries, right, women don't have human rights. And so running for office is the least of their concern, right? And so I think you can see it in Europe. Europe has an abundance. I mean, in any parliament, it's almost in 20 to 30 to 40% women. And most of Germany, for example, the United Kingdom has a high rate of women.
What is it in the U.S. in Congress? It's about 20%,
I think. Yeah, roughly. Yeah. So we're getting better, but still not super. I think that a lot of it is stereotypes across, the world about women running and being in positions of power. We're getting better, but we're nowhere near where we should be.
And I'm wondering that I've heard some people talk about this before. I'd like to see some research on this to verify any of this, which is there's always been this case. Well, men are more likely to seek these offices than women.
Sure.
I don't know if that's true or not. I know that, we have had women elected to various positions in our state. We've had a woman governor, and we even have a woman elected member of the House from Oklahoma. But I don't know if that's true. I'd really like to see some research on that says but if I'm anybody, man, woman, whoever, do I want to run for office in this environment?
I wouldn't.
I mean, do I want to put myself up through the grueling scrutiny, the constant criticism,
the threats
that are going to...
you can't go out and eat in public. Yeah. It's a really hostile environment, particularly in the United States. We are hyper-polarized, and we're also foaming at the mouth, apparently, in some corners.
That causes me to think, okay, well, what kind of people are interested in running for office in this environment? And I think we've seen this week the kind of people who are interested in running for office in this environment, right? Yep. Those that are more concerned about building their own brand, right. Those who are more concerned about getting a following and not so much concerned about making government work.
I will never own Matt Gaetz. I just can't. He's a pre-millennial. I don't know. We are making a new generation here, people, but I just can't.
There was a term that they used for kind of people that overlap Gen X and millennials, and I can't remember what it was called, but maybe we'll put him in that category.
I agree.
Right? Yeah. Well, despite the chaos, we are the source for consistency. We're the source for information. And we're going to keep you abreast of everything that's going on at the state, local, and national levels and international levels. So we appreciate you listening. And really, I've enjoyed this conversation. This has been good. There's so much going on and never a dull moment.
At all. Let's get some rest, man. We're almost a year out from
election season. Next year is going to be insane.
We're tired now, man.
That's right.
Stick with us. We'll be here. We love communication that goes both ways, not just you listening to us pontificate. We would love to hear from our audience. If you have comments, suggestions, or would like to contact us about possibly being a guest on the show, please email notmygeneration@raider.rose.edu.